Welcome to the Onstage Podcast, where we deep dive into the power of music and entertainment. Welcome, everyone, to another Onstage Podcast. We have Jonathan Taylor. He's a California native, and he represented the United States as an American cultural specialist in South America and the Caribbean, sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts. And he has performed sold-out concerts for such luminaries as UN delegates, American ambassadors, and foreign heads of state. Wow. I bet you I'm going to say, do you know Joseph Biden? You'll probably say, yeah, I do.
I don't know him.
Out! Get out!
Yeah, but a
But
friend of mine received a letter from him about 2 weeks ago, actually. A
yeah,
commendation for a friend of mine received a commendation from Mr. Biden for his charity work.
yeah. I was all over my
But I
father
don't.
when he turned 75. He got a special happy 75th birthday by the Queen of England. I was all over him.
Oh,
So you know the Queen, and before I realized that it's a generic thing, I'm like, oh darn! I thought you knew the Queen.
nice, right?
And the whole joke is that he resembled um, Prince Philip. So there's a photo of
Really,
my father, and people think it's Prince Philip, and I say no, it's my father.
Prince Philip was a very handsome man, and
That's
he
what I
was,
mean.
the Nordic god for her in a sense. I mean, when she met him, and they decided to get married, etc. And I go, but he was a very dashing young man.
Well, Mr. Taylor, I'm so excited that you're on the podcast finally, and we are where we said we would be. Um, so I'd like to ask you. I actually listened to all your music. I read everything about you. I'm like, wow, I'm so surprised it doesn't say somewhere that he sung with Elvis Presley or that he knew Frank Sinatra or he was friends with Bing Crosby because this guy's cool, you know. So can you go back to the beginning and tell us how you first became interested in music and when did you start playing your famous guitar and
I
singing?
started playing guitar probably at age 10, but when I was like 4, I was picking out tunes on a ukulele. My grandmother was a very successful silent film organist that played for all the people that you know about. Lon Chaney, the Keystone Cops, Charlie Chaplin, many times gigged with Harry Houdini because Harry Houdini was playing up in the Pacific Northwest, and she played up there. And all the people you know of that era, I go, well, she gigged with them. She was there at that premiere of City Lights by Chaplin in downtown LA at the Los Angeles Theater, Sid Grauman's Los Angeles Theater, when Einstein and Chaplin met or were there. And so that background, you're asking me a direct question when I start to play. I think that as a child, I absorbed her playing because she was always playing in the background. So I was picking out tunes when I was 4 or 5. It doesn't say that in the bio because it's like not very believable. So, but I got my first really guitar at 10, even though I was picking out tunes and humming melodies and so forth. And so that though was a half-size guitar because your fingers are so small, right? So I became a serious artist probably about 16, studying and listening Segovia's recordings and Bream and Christopher Parkening and that, and then studied with Christopher Parkening and with Pepe Romero at his house and with all the kind of famous artists and that
Wow.
at that time period. And then, went to college and that, and then started a concert career, recording career. I knew that digital was just coming in. Only my first album is analog, but digital, I knew that that would take over everything because of its convenience. Many artists at that time period in the 90s there when digital started to really pop, that I go, well, they wouldn't record on digital. And why? Because the sound is cold and metallic in comparison to analog, which is warmer. I know that Jascha Heifetz refused to, the great violinist, refused to record even the direct-to-disc stuff that they were doing back in those days, just write to acetate. And but I knew I don't. You live in the era that you live in. We don't live in the 18th century. So I go, well, whatever it is, you have to adapt. Like AI now, I go, well, it's a great upside and an incredible dark side as well. Great for medicine. I can tell you a couple stories just to, even though this isn't addressing so much your issue, but they put an AI on doing write an essay on this subject or that subject, and the essay was a great essay, and then they had cited references, but none of those references existed.
Wow.
So that means that it was coming from some other place. And also to show you the great upside of that, and who knows what is true or not, right, under those conditions. So, and another great upside is I go, well, the proteins in your body, to map them and the purpose of mapping them genetically is to um, find a treatment for, let's say, MS or, arterial, arteriosclerosis or something, anything. And I go, well, it takes 5 years for a human being to do that. And so the AI, they put it on it in 5 minutes. It had mapped the gene perfectly. It had mapped the protein, rather. And I go, that type of speed and that type of accuracy will advance medicine exponentially. So, with anything, just to relate it back to the digital, that was what was happening then. AI is what's happening now, right? So I knew that that would ultimately take over the market. I didn't know there would be streaming. I knew that they'd find a way to make money out of it. Well, at least the record companies would find a way to make money out of it. And because the streaming now is you don't get paid that much from your streaming albums, or fractions of cents, and that even, millions and millions. I had 12 million streams last year. So
Wow.
even that, so those things, the digital technology is wonderful. On the other hand, it has a dark side, just like the AI.
Well, that's a yeah. Don't get me started with AI because that's a dangerous technology because I know for a fact that I've heard a song which supposedly, I mean, I've heard it. Sounds like Amy
Yeah, yeah,
Winehouse, but
absolutely.
it's an AI, and also people thought that the Beatles, or at least Paul McCartney, had released an old song with the Beatles from the vault with John Lennon's voice, and he admitted that it was an AI. And I'm like, are you
But the
crazy?
reason why in that particular case, I totally hear you, and you're right. Drake is suing for because they did a few of his songs or one of his songs and imitated with AI. But with McCartney, I go what the AI did is it extracted John's voice from the tape so there'd be clarity, so Ringo and Paul could put down their tracks and then have the voice on that track and have it so it wasn't so grainy and so bad, because in John Lennon's day he was playing into a tape recorder, right?
I don't know how Yoko would feel about that, and Julian and Sean. I'm thinking you.
I would imagine they would. I imagine they're going to be paid because that's his estate, and I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine they'd be fine with it because it's just his voice, and of course they would. He owns the mechanical rights to that recording, and if he composed it, and I don't know if he did or not, he would have that as well.
That's the whole reason why there's a SAG after strike, and why Fran
That's
Drescher,
true.
the president, is all up because of the whole body scanning, and
That's so true.
it's sort of
You're
like,
100% right,
yeah.
Chris.
And so
Yeah,
music is
yeah.
worse because one day, like they already did it with the reunion, the 40-year reunion of ABBA, who didn't even appear on stage. They got holograms of themselves in the 70s to perform the new stuff
God,
on. And Michael
right.
Jackson hologram. What makes you think that? And I always, not I don't mention this all the time on podcasts because I want people to watch my podcast. I'll say, oh, let me guess, that podcast he's going to talk about that again. Well, I'm going to Taylor Swift now, 80, 90 years from now. Would you want to go see a Taylor Swift concert? And it's Taylor
I'll be
Swift.
dead.
Yeah, it's not even Taylor Swift. Well,
Well,
no,
I'll
they
be
could
dead.
clone you. They'll make an AI of Jonathan Taylor,
Right, right,
and
right.
that's not
No, but
even you.
you're 100% right about the strike, because
Mm.
now what you're doing is you're really putting the writers out of business. And I go, wow. I go, this is entering a territory that is very scary. I mean, it depends upon its application, right? How is the AI? How is it applied? What is it, doing? So, upside and downside.
Well, it might work for people who maybe lost their voice box from cancer, like Mr. Roger Ebert himself. He used like a voice control thing that sounded
Right,
like his
right.
voice. Well, all they have to do is
Val
just
Kilmer.
yeah,
Val
yeah,
Kilmer.
exactly.
I think in that film, in the Top Gun sequel,
Yeah,
that
they did.
some of them were
Yeah,
enhanced,
hmm
because the gentleman, unfortunately, has lost some of the power of his speech. I don't think it's completely gone, but and it's extremely sad, you
it
know,
is.
to see a fine artist like Mr. Kilmer, and very sad.
Well, the thing is now, Jonathan, is that music is going to be released that has the same kind of genre as yours, or Britney's or Elton's, whatever. And it's going to
Mhm.
be an AI voice. It's going to have all these millions and millions of streams. People are going to be listening to it on their Spotify. And it'll be like, well, are we going to be able to see this singer in concert? Because it's an AI voice. So what are they going to do? They're going to hire some guy to be this guy, like they did Remington
Right.
Steele. Remember with Remington
Like
Steele, the
or a
show?
Millie Vanilli. A Millie
And Milli
Vanilli.
Vanilli as well.
Right. I hear you. Right. Well,
Um,
that's a good question. That's a good question, and that's yet to be fleshed out.
yeah.
I'm sure legislation in both America and Canada will start infiltrating, because record companies in that will realize we're going to lose share, we're going to lose this, we're going to, So I'm sure there'll be lots of lobbyists, to try and alter or establish laws in their favor.
And more
But
scammers too.
yeah, so who knows? I don't know where it will go.
So you were talking about when you were younger and how you were listening to
Hmm.
music. I remember when I was a kid, of course, listening to this. I think it was the '78 records that my grandmother had,
Hmm.
the 33 and
Sure,
a third records, and listening to Jesus Christ Superstar and all these other musical theater albums, and
sure.
enjoying it and performing with my brother on the living room. We were performing the whole entire Jesus Christ Superstar. I would be like Jesus in one, and then I would be like Judas in the other, and we're just having fun. I was like 7 years old, right? And
Great.
and enjoying the '78s. And now you have CDs, and now they're gone. Now the MP3s, and they're gone. I
Right.
mean,
True.
so I mean, I don't even know what speed a CD even ran out. I mean,
It will, and the streaming technology will change. Something will
yeah,
change, because it's now a new form to earn money by. There
yeah,
was no reason why you couldn't do the CD and keep on keeping on. It's
yeah.
perfectly, it'll last for 100 years or more.
I
So
know.
it's just a way to change the technology so people can, so they can earn money. And
We
of
could
course, the phone. The phone is everywhere, right?
Yeah, and we could talk about AI forever. I was more interested actually in that you were studying privately for years at the home of the great virtuoso Pepe Romero. Wow.
That's right.
What was he like in person?
He was a wonderful man. He is a wonderful man. He's still playing and plays concerts all over, and he's great. And I believe that I had studied with prominent artists, but to me, Pepe Romero really improved my playing exponentially. At that time, I was like 24, I think, or something around that. And I would drive down to Del Mar, where he lived at the time, and he and I auditioned for him, of course, and he accepted me. And I would drive down once a week. Except many times he'd be on tour for like 3 months. So I'd say, "Well, what am I going to do?" He goes, "Well, just learn this piece and do this, and And so it was a wonderful experience. He's a great artist. and a fine teacher. He also still is at USC, but I think occasionally he comes in for things because mostly he's either touring and you know doing recordings.
So, who do you think is the one that really inspired you to keep going?
Andre Segovia was really my first, as with many artists, was my first. When I was about 16, I saw my grandmother took me to Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in downtown LA to see a Segovia performance. And I was absolutely entranced and amazed. I had listened to his recordings as well before. And so, really, my influence in classical guitar is Andre Segovia and Christopher Parkening and Pepe Romero and Julian Bream. So these are, older guitarists now, and that really is what inspired me. Because the electric guitar, I don't want to denigrate the electric guitar in any way, but it's not polyphonic in the sense that the classical guitar is, and it's not many voiced. You're having usually one line with rock, a lead line and things like that. So it's a different thing, but it's not the complexity and wholeness of the classical guitar. I'll give you an example. I also studied composition and arrangement and that, and all of my many arrangements. When people ask me, well, you've written, pieces for orchestra, string quartet, and these things, because, the classical guitar, and I go, it's nothing to write for orchestra or a string quartet or a brass quintet or what have you compared to the classical guitar. I go, there is no more instrument more complex or more difficult to arrange for than that. I go, it's easy for me to whip off a string quartet.
Mm.
So, and the reason I'm saying that is, I'll give you an example technically. All the instruments of the orchestra are tuned in thirds. The guitar is tuned in fourths with one third between the G and the B string. And what does that mean? I go, it means the voicings are unique. It means the voicings are different than what you would have in another group of instruments. The guitar, as Segovia said, is a miniature orchestra in itself. It has all the timbres and the colors of the orchestra. And it is so technically demanding. Who was it I'm trying to think, it was Berlioz or the other gentleman that said, the great violinist, I can't remember which one, said the violin is the most difficult instrument to play in the world with the exception of the classical guitar. And the reason why that is, I go, well, you're doing, and I hope this isn't getting too technical for your audience and I hope it's not boring them to tears, but you're doing what a string player would call double stops or triple stops. We'd call it a dyad or a triad or a tetrachord. And I go, I would have violinists. I used to teach violinists when I was at the Newport Institute of the Arts and so forth. And they would say, how can you do all those? And people think of them as chords. And I go, well, how? I go, well, that's the basis of the instrument. And so you have to find technical means to do that. As with the violin, which is mostly single string, of course it's not, chords and dyads and that, but on its whole, it's not that. So, and the guitar, it's the opposite.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so that I didn't mean to get too much down in the weeds there, but, you asked me, I try to answer fully and completely as I understand.
That's awesome. I love to hear it, actually. I don't mind you getting too technical because then I can use that and learn. I usually learn from others and
Great,
other musicians.
great, great.
And sometimes I share that information with another guest and they're like, how did you know that? I'm like, oh, I know. you know. Uh, but we had another guitarist, and a Croatian guitarist by the name of Anna Vidovic, and she's quite a wonderful guitarist. And she was telling me that her guitars are customized and personally made by a guy by the name of Jim Redgate. So they're called Jim Redgate guitars.
Mhm.
What about your guitar? Was that specifically made for you, or is that something like like a Gibson or a
Well,
Taylor?
that's a great story, and I have that story in more in depth on my app. If you go into Google Play or go into Apple and type Jonathan Taylor, I have an app in there that has it's free
I
to
downloaded
download.
it already. I
A
love it.
member To be a member, it's like $40 a year. It's nothing, and even if you're not a member, there's tons of material free there for you. So to answer you, I did a video. The reason I'm saying that is I did a video on what I'm about to say. The I have an Antonio Marin Montero guitar, and I purchased that from Pepe Romero in 1979, maybe, I don't know, somewhere in that era, and for $3,000. It's worth about 12,000 now.
Wow.
And it was the reason why that's a interesting guitar is it utilizes two methods in its fan bracing, this French method and the Spanish method of fan bracing, which kind of um, brings out a unique sound. The top of the guitar is rosewood. Rosewood is known for adding warmth to the sound, and that guitar was purchased for the reason I'm going to tell you now, a tragic story.
Oh,
Before that, before that, I had a Ramirez guitar, Manuel Ramirez, the father. There's now son luthiers and that, but the father's, and it was a 100-year-old guitar. And I had literally just come from a lesson with Pepe in Del Mar. I was driving
oh,
back home to Orange County, and I stopped by, quote, a phone booth. Right? Ever
oh.
heard of a phone? All right, so those don't exist anymore. Well, I stopped by a phone booth. I made some call somewhere, because there were no cell phones, and I left just for literally 1 minute. It couldn't have been more than 60 seconds. I came back, and the guitar had been run over by a car.
Oh, ouch.
So it was in splinters. It literally was, firewood.
Oh, wow.
Uh, it was toothpicks. So that's why I purchased the Antonio Marin Montero guitar from Pepe, and he had played that in a few concerts, and he let it go to me for 3,000, which was a good price at the time, and so there you go.
Wow,
That's
that's a
this.
tragic story, a good story to
It is a
share.
story.
But for guitarists out there, that's like they'll be crying right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it was. I was very disappointed, as you might imagine.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that I read that you have a catalog of over 300 tracks and believing that the Beatles have recorded less material than you. How do you know? Did you count everything? Do you have a
Somebody
list
counted it
of
for me.
David Bowie, Jonathan
Yeah,
Taylor, Beatles? And then, oh my
right.
goodness, I did.
The the output, and I have many that are. So I have a new record deal with HitLab Records and distributed by
Nice.
Warner Brothers Records that you don't know about there. It's not in the bio stuff. And that record deal, I just released some of the tracks from that catalog on an album entitled Guitar Chronicles. Uh, that um, uh, that title of that album was made in about 5 minutes by my um, person that manages the European part of that label in France by Yse Brisson. And she said, I was going to call it something else. And she said, what about, I go, I don't care what you call it because that's not meaningful to me. I go, the tracks are what I'm interested in. And I go, I don't care what it's called. And she goes, what about Guitar Chronicles? He said, that's fine. She goes, my God, you don't even commiserate over it. I go, what's the point? I go, it's the music that the people are interested in. And if you believe that that's marketed better or it's a better title, that's fine with me. That's your part of the deal here. So uh, many of the tracks now I'm going to recall from all the streaming services. I'm with a new company, right? So they're going to be putting those out, but they're still up there, on Apple or Spotify or wherever. All the usual streaming places everybody knows, Deezer. I don't know what's in Canada. What's in Canada that's big?
We have. I'm sure. You know what?
It's Spotify, maybe. I mean, Spotify is Swedish. Spotify is
Well,
a
we
Swedish.
have everything. We have all the streaming platforms. Like people have to use DistroKid to get their music up on Spotify. We have Deezer. We have. Do you have SoundCloud?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, we have that. So we have basically everything. I think it's universal. Um,
Yeah.
do you think social
But there are
network?
some of them. Do you know that there are some of them that you can't get on? Like my albums are in Arab countries
Hmm.
that I can't
Oh,
get on, and also in India, and because it's a worldwide wide distribution. So
oh,
sometimes, being a citizen of the United States, you actually can't get on some of their services. Believe it or not.
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. I tried to find my own stuff, and I wasn't let on.
I'm surprised. I know that if you type Jonathan Taylor "Beautiful World" into Google, you'll find you. But if you just type in Jonathan Taylor, there's 100,000 of you out there. I have no idea which one's
Right,
you.
right. Of course, you have to type Jonathan Taylor. Guitar. If you just type Jonathan Taylor guitar, that'll do it. That's all you need. But the otherwise, you'll get a black football player. And
Yeah, I
even
know.
though
I
I
know
know
it's a
I
Dutch
look
guy,
like a
man.
black football player, but I'm not a black football player.
That's hilarious. Um, do you? I know we were both younger, but do you know? Do you think that social networks help your career, your musical career? Do you think
Yeah,
it's a? Do you think it's a
I
hindrance?
think I think it, I think you have to be in social media to some degree today, and I think it does because it finds a different audience. Like, I'll give you an example. A lot of people think I'm advertised as a classical musician. I go, but I'm not. I'm classified as an indie artist. And why is that? And I go, because you would think the audience for that music is a older audience. It's not true. It's 18 through 34 is the mainstay. So, I mean, I was more as surprised about that as anybody else. But also, it has to do with the type of music I play. Yes, I play the Spanish masterpieces. Yes, I play the Bach. Yes, I play all the stuff you would expect from classical. But I also have many, many arrangements of American folk tunes, of jazz pieces, of pieces like the Wizard of Oz, which is, on that Guitar Chronicles, which is kind of a magnum opus that goes through many of the themes and is a very coherent uh, uh, one, not just a medley of tunes, a almost a tone poem. And so, hey, you want me to tell you some Wizard of Oz stories? Okay, because we were talking about that. So I arranged that for classical guitar because nobody had arranged a film score. I have two or three film scores that I arranged for classical guitar. That's one of them. Another one is the Bond pieces, the James Bond pieces.
Wow.
Okay, and I have two arrangements of that are on. Both of them are on the Guitar Chronicles album, and and so I can tell you a few things about the Wizard of Oz that are very interesting. Initially, Buddy Epson was going to be the Scarecrow. That's the guy that's Jed Clampett, that's
Hmm.
Barnaby Jones in the series. I go, well, he was originally uh, the Tin Man. And I go, what happened? I go, he put the paint on and it made him so sick he was in the hospital for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I go,
Lead paint.
I go, was serious. And I go, in those days, I made the paint. So, but talking about that paint, there's a scene in Margaret Hamilton, of course, as the witch, was an esteemed stage actress of the time, very esteemed. And she got the witch part. She had read the novels, not the novels, the stories. And a lot of those stories were written in the Coronado Hotel in San Diego because in those days you would take rooms, and that's what L. Frank Baum did. He took
Oh
rooms
yeah.
down, and he wrote different books of the Wizard of Oz series. Well, she had gotten the call to be the witch, and now she's on stage there, and they're filming in Technicolor. They're filming the her exit from the first segment when the Wicked Witch of the West is flying in because somebody landed a house on her sister Wicked Witch of the East, and it's Dorothy. And we all know that. And then all the threats, I'm going to get you and your little dog too. And now it's time for her exit. Well, she stands over a trapdoor, and she's going to be caught on a mattress that is below that trapdoor. With a couple of Union men down there to make sure she's okay. And so she stands over the trapdoor, takes her mark, and they light the smoke bomb off. And guess what happens? The smoke bomb catches her paint on her face on
Oh,
fire.
wow.
People don't know that. And I go, oh no. I go, this is serious business. So she's falling now down into the
Wow.
below the stage, right? Through the trapdoor. And Union guys all of a sudden, Jesus, Margaret's on fire, right? Oh my God, right? And so they're trying to put her out with everything, whatever they had at hand. And she spent some time. Fortunately, there weren't serious burns for her. But I go, that's some of the stories. I go, well, how do you prevent? You don't even know things like that at the time, right? I mean, the fire marshal isn't informing you.
Yeah.
So that is a gives you a example of a couple stories. Another story is the guy that played the coroner, who said, who took out the official certificate she's dead. She's not most sincerely dead. She's really dead, or something like that. And that guy later became um, little Oscar Mayer Wiener's. He later in life, he was very young, and when you see him in costume in the film, he has a dyed red beard and like kind of green robish thing on, and he's the coroner, and he's going to make the official investigation of the death of the witch. And I go, he ultimately became an advertiser for Oscar Mayer Wieners,
I
and
did.
spokesperson rather, a spokesperson. I'll tell you another story about Frank Morgan, the actor that played the wizard, and of course played the what would you say, the carnival barker, or whatever he was, the soothsayer, the storyteller that she finds, and I hope that kid gets in from the hurricane or the tornado.
Mhm.
And I go, well, L. Frank Baum uh, wrote the stories as we know, but Frank Morgan played two or three four parts in that film. And so what you did back in those days is they tell you to go down to Hollywood Costume and pick up your stuff. It's on order. We've measured your size. You're all there. So an actor would go down and pick up his costumes or her costumes. And so one day on the set, he looked into the interior lapel by the pocket. And in those days, they would sew names into your clothing. This was common. I don't know why, but people did that. I remember my grandmother had things like that. And whose name was in Frank Morgan? L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum
Mm.
had owned the tails that Frank Morgan wore in that film.
Wow.
So there's a psychic connection. There's
Yeah,
a
wow.
synchron, a very interesting coincidence.
So I take
Uh,
it follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick
yeah,
road. Yeah.
there you go. I'm good. I may do another Wizard of Oz Part Two one using themes that I didn't use in the first one.
Can
Yeah, I
you
didn't use.
do can you do anything like if I asked you to do the Unsolved Mysteries theme song or the theme
I
music
don't know
to
that theme song. I don't know that theme song.
Okay, but if you heard it, does it take you long to learn something?
Probably not. It depends upon the complexity of it, and also to adapt it to an instrument where it's a whole, where you're not just playing the lead line or playing chords. The As Segovia said, at one time the guitar was disreputable in the classical field. Why? And I go, well, basically it just was accompanying a singer playing chords or playing a little one string lead up above it. And I go, that's why it was considered that, not for other reasons. And so to adapt something to be really good, yeah, that's different than to just, toss off a few chords and that.
Do you know Mozart or Beethoven? Do you know any Chopin?
Well, Mozart, the I do the answer is yes. I've done a version of the second movement of Moonlight Sonata by
Oh.
Beethoven. I've done a version of some of the Chopin etudes or preludes. I'd have to look. And who was the other one you mentioned?
Chopin, Prokofiev,
No, no, you're Mozart.
Mozart. Yeah.
Mozart. Well, I do the variations on a theme by Mozart by Fernando Sor, and those variations were taken from his opera Die Zauberflöte, or the Magic Flute, which is a Masonic opera. And so the answer is yes to all three.
Hmm. Because I love Moonlight Sonata, only the first part and the power piano part. I don't like the. I only like the two movements. The first one goes do 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 do, do, and then you have the do 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 do. I love that part, but I don't like
Right.
the. I think that's the second movement. I don't really like that much, but I'm a big proponent of Mozart and Chopin and Prokofiev. And sometimes there's a
Sure.
point where I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, okay, I recognize that. That's a Mozart tune. Or, oh, I recognize that. That's Beethoven. But if you played something from Beethoven or Prokofiev, I couldn't tell you what it was because I haven't heard it before until then. I would have to hear the
Hmm.
music, be able to sit there and say, yeah, that's Chopin. I
Hmm.
remember that. That's my favorite.
Common.
So
Sure.
But so you've actually given me an answer to my theory that you really can't, not you personally, but someone, a guitarist, can't really just pick up a guitar and learn like anything. They have to either make it their own or they have to have a few other instruments added. Like for instance, if I've heard someone play some Billy Joel or Elton John on the guitar, but it's impossible on a marimba, for instance. And I heard a uh, Tears for Fears on a clavicle and a hammered dulcimer. It was pretty good.
Some things can be adapted and some things can't. That's actually very true. And for some reason, you can work on something that just doesn't work. And also, though, with pop music, it's usually a melody line and a chord accompanying. And that's not necessarily polyphonic. It can be, and but that's a more simple way of expressing a folk song, which is fine. But there are it's been said that Western civilization broke from most of the world in the sense that it created exposition, development, and recapitulation in music and in novels. And what does that mean? It means you expose the themes or the characters, you develop those characters or themes, and then you recapitulate or you bring it back. I think it was Bernard Shaw that said, and in the end, we will come home, and all of our travels bringing us back to home, we will know that place for the very first time because the characters are now changed, or the themes are now changed, or have a deeper or more significant meaning because they have been through something and now return. So those forms that exist in Western music, in Western literature, for instance, don't exist in Chinese music, which is a pentatonic scale, and or Arabic music. Many of those things I go, well, they're not developed. Is the theme developed in the sense, is there augmentation, diminution? Is there uh, the chordal systems added to a dodecaphonic uh, um, uh, passages or transitions? I go, well, basically, you're just kind of noodling on one thing. And those things, it's not that they don't have value, they're great value and they're cultural and, identify with that culture. On the other hand, when you read War and Peace, you've learned something about life. You have now changed. The reader has changed by being absorbing that story. And the same thing is true with music.
So you read War and Peace.
Huh?
Have you?
I, I took, you know what I did? I for years, I wanted to, I knew that I kind of had an epiphany that what I learned in school wasn't going to get me anywhere. I don't mean that to be denigrating. I think it's great for the professions, for like doctor, lawyer, all right, those things, the professions. But in terms of enlightenment or in terms of economic growth, there's nothing you learn about money, very rarely. Even the business classes are not focused on the time value of money or many other monetary concepts. So I had an epiphany that I said, well, uh, mostly what I've learned is either very limited, it won't get me to where I want to go, and or wrong, simply wrong. Like, didn't you and I learn as kids that the universe is going to slow down and then the big crunch? Well, now it's speeding up. So it's the exact opposite of what we learn. And when people say follow the science, I go, follow the science. Lobotomies were science. That was a science that you wanted to calm these people down who were so anxious. And I go, that was one way to do it, but you turned them into a zombie. Uh, so I realized early on that I had to teach myself things. And there was no internet back then. You'd have to go to the library. So I taught myself. And that I took literature. I would say, okay, let's focus on the Germans. Let's say I'm going to philosophers like Kant and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and that, or then maybe I do the French authors or Voltaire or whatever. And so I did that myself, but I didn't feel that school provided things that were going to, what shall I say, help me. Yeah. So, I mean, and that's not a judgment about those people that have gotten like degrees in engineering or architecture. That's great. But, that wasn't my interest.
So if you weren't a musician, what other career path might you have pursued then?
I owned businesses. I owned a personnel company for years that I had 136 employees in that. I
Wow.
had real estate broker licenses. I had many
Wow.
things, but I didn't really care about that stuff, to be honest. That wasn't where my heart was. My heart was in my touring, in my playing, those things, and I traveled the world. I've been many places in the world. I have adventures. I have a series on my app that is called Adventures in Touring, and it tells stories about. I almost died in the Amazon when I played there. I had
Wow.
all sorts of adventures in Romania, or played with on the same series with Luciano Pavarotti in the Philippines, and many,
Wow.
many different adventures, because I go, well, when you go out into the world, something's going to happen.
Have you met Luciano Pavarotti?
I've met Luciano 4 times. I met him
Wow.
first when he is a great artist and a great human being, passed away now, of course, and a great artist, so just the most glorious singer
Wow.
and a fine, fine individual. And first time I met him, actually, I was playing at Schoenberg Hall at UCLA, and he's playing at Royce Hall. And
Hmm.
he was coming over because he'd been, of course, singing opera in Italy, traveling the train up and down the country of Italy, and Scala and all the places he played. And he was doing a recital at Royce Hall in UCLA, and I met him then. And he was a lot less weight than what he ended up to be.
Hmm.
He wasn't that overweight when I first met him. Then I met him on other occasions, things. But at the time, I go, well, he wasn't. When people say he's overweight, and I go, well, was he 250 or something? He wasn't that overweight, a little bit. And then he got very overweight, which, of course, you just can't be that overweight and survive. Uh,
Yeah. We're thinking about Orson Welles. We're thinking about
that's right. That's a
Jonathan
perfect
Winters,
example. That's right.
Buddy
Orson
Hackett.
Welles, Buddy Hackett. Orson Welles was very big. at the near his death. I don't know what the number was, but it was up there. And he would just literally be sitting on a chair in the middle of a stage,
It's
right?
terrible. I was sort of almost 230 pounds about a year ago, and then I went on keto and I lost like 35 pounds. So here
Oh
I
yeah,
am, skinny.
yeah,
Um, but you were talking about your little trip to Amazon. You almost died. Can you share that story with us? What happened there?
sure. Sure. So I was touring all of Brazil, Belém, Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro, many other cities. And I was in Belém. Now, what's Belém? Belém is a small, not too small. Belém is actually the Portuguese word for Bethlehem.
Oh
And
wow.
it is on the mouth, not the mouth, like the side of the Amazon River, which goes all the way up to Bolivia, big long river. And so I was playing there, and I was being introduced to the city one 11 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, and there were about 10,000 people out on a open air. I was on a stage. I wasn't performing. I was being introduced because the concert was that evening, and they wanted to sell the final few tickets. And so I'm being introduced, and there's the mayor, and there's I call them the glitterati of the society. And they wanted me to try their national dish, which was like a goulash, it was like a soup thing. I don't remember the name of it. Not like adobo like it is in the Philippines.
Hmm.
And so as they're honoring me to try this national dish, and my monkey brain, my amygdala, or way back here, my reptile brain told me, don't eat that. Right? And of course, my social side of my brain, where I'm in front of thousands of people, said, that's like really insulting, right? I mean, that
Hmm.
would be very insulting. No, right? Like calling somebody's mother a prostitute, right? So
Oh.
I'd be very insulting. And I go, well, I can't do that. So my social side went out. I drank it. And about 2 hours later, I didn't know where the hell I was.
Oh.
I mean, about 2 hours later, and what did I get? I go, well, I got cholera. And so cholera dehydrates you, you vomit and that. So fortunately, I had just played, I shouldn't say 2 hours later, like maybe 8 hours later, because I had done the concert and I went back to my hotel. And I laid in the hotel room for about a week. Fortunately, it was actually the last concert of the tour, it was coincidentally. I was scheduled to go back to the States after that. And so um, I was so dehydrated, and in those days I was a real bone. I mean, I was very thin, too thin. I was so thin that I used to eat. I used to really overeat a lot, to because you lose about 3 pounds when you do a concert.
Mm.
When you're sweating in those lights, and the energy you're putting out, I go, oh, you burn calories like crazy. I was when friends would tell me, well, Elvis would black out his windows. I go, he needed to. I go, you have no idea the energy that man is putting out. And I go, Colonel Tom worked him to death. And so I came back. Fortunately, I was tended to, and I was okay later, but I was like, the heart was not working properly, right? So that is my story of almost dying in the Amazon. And before that, they had rented a boat for me, a private boat, and I had a couple days before that, I'd gone down the Amazon River and met many native people who were wonderful, just little tiny people with perfect proportions, not like a midget or a dwarf, where the proportions are different. I go, oh no, they're perfectly proportioned, but they were like small, very petite, 100 pounds. So that's one of my adventures in the Amazon. Many more. I
Wow.
saw looking at a boa constrictor and thinking, I'm just part of the food chain.
That's funny.
I'm just
Um,
part of the. Your ego vanishes, and your cultural background and that. And I go, it vanishes under those conditions because it's not relevant to your survival. And those, the Amazon, it's an incredibly mysterious place. To show you how different it is when you travel, and many people know this as well, that I go, well, the blue that you know of or that I know of as blue in California, what I think of as blue or red or green is not the same there. And why is that? Because the sun is shining on the earth from a whole different thing. So the
wow.
light is different. And I go, yeah, it's blue, but it's not really blue, right? Not the blue I'm used to.
Oh,
Every
wow.
monkey, every monkey has its tree, and I was out of my tree. so so the Amazon was wonderful. Met the natives, communicated with them, just as human beings. And when you meet somebody from such a different culture, it's one thing to meet Westerners, Canadians, French, German. That's different. We're all very similar. All right.
Yeah.
But when you meet somebody like that, I go, wow,
Now,
they're so not like you.
you brought me to mind. There was this country singer by the name Dave Carroll, and him and his band Sons of Maxwell. He's a Canadian musician. He wrote a song called "United Breaks Guitarist" because when he put his guitar on the plane, United Airlines, they broke it. So he wrote a song called "United Breaks Guitars." How
Very
do
cute.
you, or how did you, or how do you transport your guitar knowing this story?
Okay. First of all, I carry my guitar on board, and it fits perfectly into the overhead compartment. I would never put it down in the hold because it would crack it because
Oh,
of the
wow.
cold. uh, you know, right? Cold contracts, heat expands, right? So now let's say, I don't know, let's say you're going to a warm environment somewhere, but you've been up at 30,000 feet and it's super cold. Ever unpacked your suitcase after a flight and it was cold?
Oh,
Ever had that experience?
no, no, but when I went to Turks and Caicos a few years ago, the luggage that I purchased just for this tropical climate trip ended up with this long cut. Like one of the customs had taken a knife and just cut it. I'm like, I just bought this, and
Right,
you ripped it. I mean, like
right.
really?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't care.
No.
Yeah. So, did that answer the question?
Oh yeah, you're fine. But if your guitar fits in the compartment, do you know that the plane you take, the compartment will fit your guitar? Or
They
you
all,
ask?
they all, I've never had a problem ever, ever. I've never had a problem.
So, okay, so how do you approach practicing rehearsing? Do you have any unique techniques or routines? Do you, like, for instance, when you went to the Amazon or somewhere else, uh, are they the same routines, or do you have to go according to what their laws, or um, how do you do it?
Well, in terms of concert programs, I choose the programs, and they're pretty much uniform in the sense that you're going to have, let's say, an hour and 40-minute show with a break in between, an intermission, and so, like in India, for instance. Here's one. You like the death story. So I was almost assassinated in India.
What?
Yeah, boy, it's the day after Halloween. It's the day after Halloween. Yeah.
What?
So I was playing in Madras, and I was playing at the replica of Albert Hall. An exact replica of Albert Hall exists in India, Madras, and I had been sponsored by the Madras Musical Association. I actually helped them get a music library after that tour. Sent them all sorts of music, so they now have a music library there. And I had a driver, and it was a Rolls Royce. I had a driver that was just like crazy. And so he took me down to the ruins in Madras, 50 or 100 miles, I can't remember, down southern, or many ancient Mughal emperor ruins. I went to go see those, and he just got kind of crazy, and I could tell he was going to try to attack me and kill me.
Oh,
So, which is fine. I told him, I let him know that if he tried something, he'd pay a price, and that I was stronger than I look. And that when you travel the world is not always rainbows and unicorns. And so I got back, and so everything it worked out. Got back to the hotel for the concert that evening. I told the management, and I've never told management ever this in my life. I've never canceled a concert ever. I said, if he's in the audience, I won't play because I knew he'd try something. And so that was all taken care of. But I mean, you have tremendously beautiful and wonderful adventures. You know, you have beautiful adventures, and then you have this is the in the great tapestry of life. This is just one thread, right? But and people say, well, why did he do it? And I go, because they're crazy. That's why. I go, who knows why? I mean, why you and I, as normal people, are not even thinking about, not to get political, but why even, who would even think about chopping the heads off of babies like Hamas? Who would even think of such a thing? You know, nobody, no normal person even thinks in those. You see a baby, you tickle it or you want to kiss it, you know.
yeah.
So what I'm saying is that you encounter dark things and beautiful things and wonderful things. Not to focus on just that, but so life is a great adventure, and you are enhanced by all of your travels, and you turn into something much different than you would have had you not traveled. Especially if you have an open mind.
You have to be grateful with what you have. Also, that you got to
Totally.
be grateful when you wake up in the morning that God has given you another day. We forget
Every
that.
morning I wake up and thank God for my blessings. That's an honest answer.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the way I roll. Uh, I thank God for all my blessings. It's wonderful. Health is everything.
I totally agree with you, John.
See how much we've
So,
talked about music?
yeah, except the whole
Hardly at
thing
all.
about how you died in the Amazon and stuff. It would have been
Yeah,
more
yeah.
interesting if you said that you took the guitar and hit him over the head or something.
Well, the guitar was back at the hotel.
Or you traveled on United Airlines and they broke it. I said, "Hey, I know this other guy named Dave. Wow,
Yeah.
you know him?" No. Um, so, what's your creative process? How do you put a song together?
Well, because I studied, let's talk about arrangements. If it's a piece like, I don't know, Sevilla is a Spanish masterpiece, you're reading it off of the off of the music. But if I'm arranging something, which I think is more what you're asking, that I'm using different techniques. Maybe I'll use a Babbitt square, which is probably not familiar to your audience much, but Milton Babbitt developed a way to take each permutation of a theme. He used it for 12 tone music, but it can be used in other ways. I'm just saying this is one technique I use. Uh, and I'm trying to find the permutations of those notes. I'm building chords from them, or maybe I'm using the theme to transition. Maybe I'm using the theme as the A theme or B theme or C theme in a rondo form, returning. So I'm arranging you. That's an example of one technique. That's an example of that. I never write from the guitar because you should never write from the instrument you're an expert at. So
Mhm.
sometimes I will use a piano because I don't know how to play piano. I can do it crudely enough. I don't want an expert because now I'm playing. Composing is very different from playing. So is orchestrating, by the way. And I go, if things are not pure at first, and you're thinking about orchestration all the time, I go, that's the last thing you think about. Whether it's going to be a bass guitar, a lead guitar, a drum, or flutes, brass, maybe the violin section or the cello section. So orchestration is usually in composition used to illustrate the colors, but the fundamental of the themes have to be there in order to have quality and have unity. And there's a battle going on between unity and variety. And that battle has to be balanced. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's some of the ways in which I go down. For instance, I said on the Wizard of Oz stuff, because we were talking about that, uh, I said the fanfare, which is the opening of the Wizard of Oz, bum 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 ba da 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 bum ba da 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 da. All right, that I use that fanfare, and instead of I used it doing harmonics and octaves, adapting it to the classical guitar. So it is uh, orchestrated in a different way than it would be, with the instrumentation you know it as with the orchestra.
That's
I hope I'm
interesting.
not boring your guests by getting into all the technical stuff there. I hope this
No, I
is not.
mean, yeah, I mean, we're having fun. I'm getting a lot of knowledge. I'm understanding who Jonathan Taylor is and his creative process and his music. So nothing wrong with that. Um, but yeah, and I've heard from other musicians, and many of them, they go outside and look. They see a blue sky. They see a dog running across the street. They just see, it's like beautiful to them. It's heaven. And they say, "Hey," and then they get inspired to write a song.
Yeah.
Others are
Well,
like,
that can be, that light or those images can be an abstract in sound. I'll give you an example of that on the Wizard of Oz stuff about Harold Arlen. So, Harold Arlen, the composer of all those songs in the Wizard of Oz and score, his real name was Hyman Arlick, a son of a Jewish cantor in New York. Came out west, and of course, Louis B. Mayer hired him. And I'll tell you a story that most people don't know about, a piece that nobody should have ever heard and is now one of the most beloved American classics. And of course, Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
mm-hmm,
Somewhere Over the Rainbow was a final ballad that Harold Arlen wrote. It was not initially in the scores in of the other songs. Like initially, he wrote "If I Only Had a Brain." Now, just think of that title. Can you imagine him sitting there, which is with his scotch and his cigarette, and writing a song that says "If I Only Had a Brain"? That's just very funny. And so, what did Harold Arlen do? I go, well, one. Then I'll tell you why it almost didn't get into the film. But first, how he wrote it. He was driving down Sunset Boulevard, going to Grauman's Chinese Theater with his wife for a 4 p.m. matinee. And what was on the horizon? A rainbow. This is not BS. This is a true story. And he looked up and he saw that rainbow. And like all good composers, myself included, he kept manuscript paper with him or a little something to write on, because you get an idea, you better write it down because it'll be gone, all right, by the end of the evening. And so he started to write the A and B themes, the principal themes that everyone knows. And I go, that is a true story. So you talk about inspiration, I'm supporting your point. This is the true story of how Harold Arlen started to write Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Now, let me tell you what happened to that song as it got into the film. So now they're filming in sepia tone, Dorothy singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, a ballad. And they needed a ballad because all the other songs are up tempo. and they wanted a ballad. So they're filming. She's singing with Toto, and she's dreaming, if I could only get out of here and somewhere over the rainbow, right? And a song of, I won't say despair, but of aspiration. And so they, the next day, the daily rushes, the big man comes down to see the rushes and see, what have you got for me, right? And who is that? Louis B. Mayer, of course. Louis B. Mayer looks at the sequence, the film sequence of her singing on the cart, and he hated it. He hated it. He said, "My God, look at the cart, and she looks like a hayseed, and all these things." He didn't like it, so he said, "I don't want it in the film. Take the music number out of the film. Just go right into the plot." And took it out. Well, one of the guys, uh, who a technical person there, loved the song. And so he said, "Oh, God, I don't want to take it out." And so he convinced Louis B. Mayer to put it in. But that's not the end of the story. Another person, the powers that be, uh, didn't like it. And why didn't they like it? Because it offended them. Now, what the hell could offend you about that song, right? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Of course, we never get offended for anything in our society nowadays. Uh, and it was the octave. Starts off with an octave leap, right? And he didn't like it that it started with an octave. So it got taken out again. And then through cajoling and whatever, they got put it back in. So that song, which has now become, one of the top 10 or 20 beloved American, like White Christmas or many other, New York, New York, many, many other songs. I go, it's a beloved American ballad that everyone in the world knows. And so that is a story about Somewhere Over the Rainbow and how inspiration initially got Harold Arlen to write it and how it almost didn't exist for the public.
That's interesting. It's a great song.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful, beautiful ballad. And I'm trying to remember, what was Judy Garland's real name?
Francis
Grumsh.
Gum.
That's it. Frances Gum. The Gum sisters or something, or the Gum family. They were vaudevillians, right? And traveled around. That's right.
My mother was like a fan of Judy Garland. She used to, you
Sure.
know, watch Wizard of Oz with me. And it's so sad what happened to her. I mean, sort of like she
Very
died
sad.
so young, but in 1937 when Wizard of Oz was made, she was only 17 years old. She's just like a
Very
pretty
young.
14-year-old girl, and yet, I mean, I believe she married Vincent Minnelli, and then they had Liza, I believe, and Lorna Luft, I think, is another daughter, but from a different marriage. So I was able to gather a little bit um, knowledge about that whole thing back and forth because my mom was a fan of Judy Garland, and also we had Bert Lahr, and
Sure.
then we had Ray Bolger, then we had Frank Morgan, and then Margaret Hamilton, and I think the last one that played the Munchkin in the actual movie passed away just recently. I think at 98 or something.
Oh, really? He's
Yeah,
like the final one
the
that,
final one, the
okay.
last one. So they're all gone now.
Sure. Right.
Um, so
Well,
and
that's a long time ago. It's a long time
yep.
ago.
So what advice would you give to aspiring musicians looking to break in the music scene?
Learn your instrument. That's what's most important. Uh, Keep plugging it, getting a record deal. That's a very important thing. Uh, it's okay to gig. Like, for instance, right now, I'm not touring or gigging at all. I'm filming videos for the app and filming and learning pieces to do that and recording audio, for albums. But I'm not performing live in that. I go, I love performing live. Now, don't get me wrong. played for thousands and I love it and it's great. On the other hand, I go, well, the world is different too. Well, for 3 years, nobody toured.
Hmm.
The Rolling Stones didn't tour, right? With COVID, that's what I mean. I go, nobody toured. And so, I think that the movie theater now is gone too. I think the movie theater, I don't know how you'll get people back in the movie theater except for 10%. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. It's Netflix, it's all your home computer and that and your
I mean,
big screen.
a couple of months ago, I went to see the new Mission Impossible with a
Hmm.
couple of friends, and the whole entire theater was filled up. The
That's
whole theater.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
And it's a
great.
good
I'm glad to
movie.
see.
Yeah.
I'm sure, yeah. But what advice do I give? To break in, you have to have a record deal. Most people say you don't have to have a record deal because you can put the stuff up there and distribute it yourself. I go, so what? You're buried in the mud. I go, you have to have promotion. Most people that are on the streaming services are not being promoted, and therefore they're like down in the mud. And that's what the main thing is. And if you're going to do it yourself, I go, well, it's going to cost a lot of money to promote it and so forth. So that's why I recommend that. But when you said social media, I think that's the way of everything because everybody's on their phone.
Hmm.
Everybody's on their phone.
Yeah,
They're either
exactly.
yeah, they're answering emails, they're texting, they're listening to podcasts like yours, they're
Thank you.
listening to music. Yeah, listening to music, and
Hmm.
that's what it is. The podcast is the new medium of instead of television. The podcast in that,
Hmm.
yeah, there's the series on Netflix or that or whatever series you're watching or films, but I go well. Uh, in a way, Larry King never had what you have, Chris. Larry
No, but he
King may
was
have had
cool because you could learn a lot from Larry King. Like I remember when Larry King had so many different celebrities, musicians, and his line of questioning, he'd be like sitting there and thinking, "So I was reading somewhere where you were at a restaurant, blah blah blah," and then they would just say yes, and then they would open up. I'm trying to learn how to be a good
No,
interviewer.
you're
Like
doing a great job.
I interviewed Bill Boggs, and he's the king of interviews. And I was a little worried that every time I asked him a question, he was going to judge me and said I would not ask it like that.
No, no, no.
But
Don't think
eventually
that.
he
Don't.
said, I said, so I don't give surveys, but can you give me an idea of what you thought of my interview questioning and stuff? And he was like, he liked it. I was like, yes, coming from Bill Boggs, that's a lot. It was
That's
awesome.
totally great. I think you're asking in my opinion, you're asking all the right questions. And,
Thanks.
I've had such a varied background that I go off in many different directions because that's just how I am. I mean, I've lived a certain type of life that's very unusual. So, there's nothing, I always tell people, I go, it's very difficult to offend somebody like me. I just don't care. I mean, I don't believe in those ideas, offending and I go, you should have the freedom to ask anything you wish. And of course, the person has the right to say yay or nay to that. But I go, that's what freedom of speech is all about and freedom of thought. And without freedom of thought, how does one arrive at wisdom? How do,
Hmm.
if we're just do these canned thoughts, I go, well, how do you get there? You have to have experience. You have to have the freedom to make what some people will call mistakes. And I go, well, what is a mistake? Some things are mistakes and some things are just for learning. Got to ride the bicycle and fall down many times before you can ride it and balance it properly.
Yeah.
So you're doing a
Well,
great job, I think.
thanks, I appreciate it. I learn a lot from podcasters like Lex Fridman, Rich Roll, Joe Rogan, Michaela
Joe was a
Peterson.
stand-up comedian, wasn't he? Joe was a stand-up
Joe
comedian and
Rogan,
was
no, Joe Rogan was actually he was the
and
host
a
of
wrestler.
Fear Factor.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Rich Roll, I think he was Olympian. And Lex Friedman interviewed. Actually, it's one of the best interviews is when Lex Friedman interviewed Joe Rogan. And I always kind of I'm going to pull a Larry King on you.
Please.
Mr. Taylor, so
Yes.
Do you critique your own work?
Not really. I mean, every when I hear it, yes. When I'm in the studio, yes. I always do that. You know, you want a good take. You might do 5 takes or 4 takes, and the first one might be the best or the last one. And sometimes it's not best or worst. It's not that at all. I go, well, this has these qualities, this has these qualities. It could be either or. Sometimes I go, I don't know, pick one. You know, they're all good, but this one's different than this one. When people say, "Oh, this is how Jonathan Taylor plays the Bach chaconne," and I go, "Yeah, on 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, in 2012 or something, right?" So I go, again, it won't be like that. It'll be different. So to critique, you want to critique, that you're not making errors and things like that. But also, it sometimes it's on such a plane that it, you can't even judge which one is better because they're just different types of playing.
Well, oh, that's your dog. Oh, uh-oh.
Doggy. It's okay. So, getting back to Joe Rogan, wasn't he also a wrestler or something?
I'm not
Or
really
like,
sure. All I know is that when I first was introduced to Joe Rogan, he was the host of the Fear Factor. And
wow,
then
okay.
he ended up with his own podcast, which Spotify paid millions for him. And then suddenly musicians like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, they all pulled their music from Spotify.
Oh, it's
Plus,
too
the
bad.
whole thing where Sting sold his entire catalog for like 300 million. And I'm like, why? I mean,
Right.
that those things don't make people like you and other musicians who are trying to make a name for themselves, and yet someone like Sting or someone like I think Bruce Springsteen as well sold his catalog. I mean, all these years where you just created music and you performed and you have record albums, vinyl albums, even today's bands
Yeah,
are releasing
true.
stuff on vinyl, believe it or
That's
not.
true. Right.
And Rolling Stones just actually released their new album on vinyl.
Oh, that's
And
great.
because I do agree, it does sound better than CD. I do agree. Um,
It's interesting that they're selling their catalogs and that because I mean, but at their stage in life, I mean, what are you going to do with 300 million? I mean, in the end, I say by the time you're dead, you should have most of your money given away to other people or to causes or to good works or something like that. I go, what is it you're going to do? Put it in the coffin with you? You know.
well, I know, and that's right. And you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. I totally agree with you. Uh, what
Right.
what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Just of good music and that you added beauty to people's lives. Because music is healing. I mean, some people don't believe that, but I have seen that occur. I believe that music can actually heal people, that it may be somebody who's mentally uh, they have mental illness, or it may be somebody that's recovering from something. And to add beauty to the life, you can be sad and you can be happy, and it doesn't matter whether you have $300 million or 79 cents for a taco. So, I mean, uh, I think that music is the most abstract. They know that it increases your intelligence by a certain factor, especially classical music, that it finds synapses or finds places in your brain and opens them to where you're able to have a higher intelligence quotient.
I totally agree with you, Jonathan, because what happened is that I'd heard the story about this elderly gentleman who had really bad Alzheimer's, and the family was trying to, give him some stimulate because there's a lot of Alzheimer's patients out there who just get stimulated by memories from music. So what they did is they started playing this favorite song of his when he was, you know, I guess you call it normal, and he started singing to them, and just a little bit of of just a little bit of recognition, and he was singing a song, and it was great. So you're right. I mean, music does heal, and music, you know, does soothe you. And I guess that's how you deal with your own mental illness is by music. Is it your own music, or would it be other music that you listen to?
I listen to other music, but I'm so involved in either arranging or learning something that I don't listen that much to music because I'm in the middle doing it. I can tell you something about saving it. You just reminded me of something in India. I was playing at the National Theatre in Bombay. They call it Mombasa now. And I have many India stories. We'll have to do that next time.
Hmm.
Uh, Many India stories that a gentleman came to my recital, and boy, we're down into the macabre again. And he was going to kill himself, and he didn't kill himself because he went to my recital and wrote my manager a letter. I don't even know where the hell that letter is now. And I go, it's locked away in some storage unit. Who knows? And the manager and I got together after that tour, and I go, that was worth the tour right there. And he said, right. And that the playing had clicked something in him where he no longer was suicidal or no longer wished to leave this world for the next.
I love
And
that kind of
I,
story.
yeah, and I said to my manager, I said, right there, that was worth all the whole tour.
Hmm.
And So that is a true and real example of healing, not exaggerated, not distorted. That's a true story. And people, uh, life would be very different without music. The most abstract. You know that Einstein, before he would sit down in that chair in Princeton in his home and get his pipe and start thinking, he could sit in a chair and think for hours to go through
Hmm.
his theories and his Gedanken experiments, right? His thought experiments. I go, well, one of the rituals he would do is he would play his violin. He was an amateur violinist all his life. He loved it. And I go, well, he would play his violin and 30 minutes and whatever it was, an hour, I don't know. And then he would, and people say, why do you do that? And he goes, because I have to get into the ethereal realms.
Hmm. Wow.
And I go, wow. And he certainly did. And then he would, of course, start attacking physics problems. He also said that it's not that I'm smarter than everyone, it's just that I stay with the problems longer.
Wow. That's interesting.
So there's legacy.
I was reading something in your lines of death and legacies. Um, I was reading somewhere about this company, and what they do is they create QR codes that they stick on a tombstone, and all the person has to do is just use his phone and reads the QR code, and they download videos and photos and
Wow.
everything of the person that had died. You know,
Right.
dancing with their
Interesting.
wife or their husband, and I'm like, wow, this is
Sure.
interesting. So that would be interesting. So people, 100 years from now could just, if it exists, QR codes,
Yeah.
whatever, to see
Right.
me at this age, but I think it's kind of interesting. Um,
Very interesting. That's added value to for the mortician, for the cemetery, right?
exactly. Yes,
And for another 59.95, you get
I know. Um, and we're really not like the Egyptians who would bury all the trinkets and treasures with them, thinking that they can take all that with the afterlife. But like again, like I said, you've never seen a hearse um, pulling a U-Haul. Mhm.
right.
So before we end the stream, can you give us a little bit um, of let's see, give us a little bit of a advice to us, like a final piece of advice to
Sure.
people out there
I'll do what
that just want to
I'll
give
give
up.
you. Sure. I'll give you an advice that Winston Churchill did. I think I don't know whether he was speaking at Harvard. One time when he was speaking in Kentucky, he actually invented the term "an iron curtain has descended over Europe." That was his contribution. But one thing he was asked to give, I can't remember the university, it's Harvard something, and uh, it came his time to speak, and he stood up. He was sitting in a chair, and he said, "Never give up," and then sat down.
Oh
And
wow.
that's my advice. And that's my advice. And that was his speech.
Yeah, talking about Winston Churchill, I remember that. Remember that famous photo of Winston Churchill with this look of like complete like disgust on his face, and it's a
Mhm.
well-known portrait of Winston Churchill. I think it's either hanging up in Buckingham Palace or in the White House, but he's like leaning up against something and he's like looking at the camera. Well, I don't know if you remember that photo, but I can give you the story. Now, since I'm a photographer as well, Joseph Karsh took that photo. And you know how he got that famous photo? And photographers
No.
do this all the time. So you should do a little history study and research. Found out that Winston Churchill was a big proponent of cigars, especially the large Cabana ones. And you would never see him without a cigar. You would never see him without a cigar.
Mm-hmm.
So said, "You want my photo with my phone?" And he'd be just so what Joseph Karsh did is he walked up to Winston, he removed the cigar from his mouth, threw it away, walked up to the camera, and by the time Joseph Karsh looked through the camera, Winston was like, "Argh," and snap. That's where you get the famous photo from. I learned that in photography class from a Portugal.
Wonderful.
He was saying, mentioning about that famous Winston Churchill portrait. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. Okay, Jonathan Taylor,
Great
everyone,
meeting you, Chris.
nice meeting you. Everything will be linked down below, including Spotify music and his. You have, I think you said you had. Did I ask you what your newest music
Well,
was?
I have an app. I have an app
App.
on Google Play for Android, and then on Apple for iPhone. And if you just go in there and type Jonathan Taylor, you'll see the app.
Well, I downloaded the app, everyone, and it's excellent. You'll learn everything. There's music, there's videos, excellent. And I don't know any other musician that actually had his own app. It's amazing. Um,
Thank you.
Jonathan Taylor, guitarist, everyone. Everything, like I said, will be down below. And I really appreciate being given this opportunity to interview you. You're a master guitarist. Love your music. And everyone, don't forget to go to
Thank you.
Spotify. So
Thank
thank
you.
you, Mr.
And
Taylor. I
never
really
give up.
appreciate it.
I'll talk to
Never
you
give up.
soon.
See ya.
Take care. Bye bye.